All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Day 37, episode 38. We're almost through this thing. We only have a couple episodes left until the 40 days of 4VKM is all over. And we do the podcast from there, and I get to take a day off. So, very excited. I'm very excited. So, this episode, very cool episode, one of my favorites. Timestamp is 11/11, coincidentally. And it's titled, The Boss is Back. And who are we talking about, right? Which boss are we talking about? We're talking about Vincent Kennedy McMahon when he came back. Remember I said it in the last episode. He comes back on January 6, 2023. We thought it was going to be the Brunson brothers delivering the blow, bringing Trump back. No, look here, not there. It was Vince McMahon coming back instead. I will never forget, a good friend of mine, he texted me that day. He goes, the return of the king today on January 6th. And I said, yep. Yes, it was, right? So, let's recap, right? Remember, we had the episode several back, macrodosing 4VKM, where we talked about how Vince kind of laid out in storylines his whole scandal, even giving you the dates and everything, June 17th, you know, showing you guys kind of, you know, past proves future at the end of the day. And you have so many things, again, in storyline that came true throughout this scandal. So Vince leaves, and I show you guys in the beginning of the video, we got the DX music, right? We're green for DX, right? Because who's essentially taken over WWE since Vince is gone, even now? Triple H is in charge of creative of the main roster, and then Shawn Michaels is in charge of NXT. He's doing Triple H's old job, talent development, right? Now, these guys in storyline, they were a pain in the ass of Vince McMahon, and they just used to make his life a living hell on TV, and they would do things like take over the WWE headquarters, spray paint it, with the DX symbol green on the outside. They took over his plane, spray painted it with the DX sign on the plane, right? And you know, there's this scene where Vince is basically, you know, leaving WWE because his daughter has turned on him and joined Triple H. Remember that happened at Armageddon 1999. What a year 1999 was, right? So that was the first time Vince left. End of the era, remember that? During Junior's plane crash, the whole timeline matched up. But this was later on. He came back in that September, beat Triple H for the WWF Championship. And then he has a match at Armageddon with Triple H at the end of the year, in December. And what happens there, Stephanie McMahon turns on her dad, joins Triple H, and then they start out as the authority figures right there in 1999 into the new millennium, 2000. It's the McMahon-Helmsley era, they call it. So Vince leaves, and as he's leaving, Shane O'Mac leaves with him. Now, fast forward all these years later, I think it was 2022, Shane leaves WWE again. He gets in some trouble behind the scenes at the Royal Rumble. Vince wasn't very happy with him, and he said, you're gone, Shane, you're gone. So Shane leaves in 2022. He leaves with Vince in this scene in 1999, and then you have Triple H and Stephanie being like, bye, Dad, bye, Dad. And they're saying, Triple H looks at Stephanie, goes, your whole family's gone. Everybody's gone now. Who's going to run the show? He goes, Shane's gone. Bye, brother, right? Shane leaves with Vince. Vince is pissed. You know, he's humiliated by Stephanie joining with Triple H. And then Linda's gone too at this point, right? And Linda is off in real life working with Trump at the America First PAC, right? Well, not working with Trump, but, you know, working on Trump's behalf, I guess. I don't know how you want to say that. But, you know, that comes out later in this video as well, right? So all the McMahons are gone except Stephanie and Triple H, and guess what? That's exactly what happened in 2022 when Vince got the boot, right? And he retired on June 17th as CEO. So what happens? Stephanie takes over as the CEO and chairwoman, right? Nick Khan gets elevated. He's co-CEO with Stephanie too, right? So they're running the companies. McMahon's still in there as Vince is out. Now, we fast forward a little bit, right? We go to 2011. 2011, CM Punk, he's in a big storyline where I've talked about this. Remember, he had the match with John Cena. If John Cena lost, then Vince was going to fire John Cena. And that's ultimately what led to Triple H coming out at that point in 2011 and saying, hey, the board of directors has lost confidence in you, and you're out, and I'm in, right? So, again, that happened again. It happened in 2000, happens in 2011, and then it happens in 2022. So, in real life. So, you have CM Punk. He's given this speech to Vince McMahon about how all his friends that he released from WWE and how, he's released so many good people. And Vince is like, you know what? They deserved it, right? Now, remember, CM Punk, he's got the Cult of Personality theme song, right? Like Mussolini and Kennedy, right? So I'll show you some little clips of those guys there from his Titantron videos, we like to call it. But going back to those releases, right? So in 2022, there were several releases in WWE. And a lot of these people Triple H ended up bringing back, right? But the number one person on that list, the first person that got released in WWE in the year 2022 was a guy by the name of Ace Steel. And he ends up going to AEW and joins up with CM Punk. He trained CM Punk back in the day, right? So they end up getting back together. And then you'll see in the last 4VKM episode that I did, you'll see that they are tied together and Punk's leaving AEW and coming back to WWE. So it's almost like he was released on purpose to go to AEW, raise some hell with Punk, and then get Punk back over here somehow, right? So we'll touch on that more in the future. But in 2011, when Triple H took over then, you had CM Punk was like a free agent, right? And he said he was leaving. And Triple H was like, hey, man, call me. It's a new era. We're doing things different now. Why don't you come back? Sounds familiar. Sounds kind of just like what happens in 2023 when CM Punk comes back, right? Vince is gone. We're doing things different now. Why don't you come on back, right? There's an account, WrestleVotes, right? Which I always find interesting. WrestleVotes came onto the scene in 2016. Established 2016 in their logo. It's an anonymous account. And they always drop really good inside information that ends up panning out, right? So they'll drop something about a show before the show happens. And then you're like, oh, wow, WrestleVotes said that was going to happen, right? So nobody knows who it is. But he's in the mix always. And the name's funny, too. WrestleVotes, right? So WrestleVotes, 2016. We had an election that year. Donald Trump, who was in WWE, became the president that year, right? WrestleVotes. So, I don't know. It's interesting. Now, going back to Punk, as Punk's reading the riot act to Vince McMahon, he's name-dropping a couple people. Colt Cabana. Now, Colt Cabana is a whole reason all these years later that CM Punk ends up having some trouble in AEW. They were friends back in the day, but friendship went sideways. Now they're in the same company doing business, and, there's some backstage politicking that blows up, and essentially this press conference from hell that happens in AEW had a lot to do with this Colt Cabana guy that CM Punk is mentioning to Vince in 2011. Another name he mentions is Luke Gallows, who is a teammate of CM Punk in WWE. And guess what? Luke Gallows, coincidentally, comes back as Triple H in 2022, are bringing back all these wrestlers that got released earlier in the year, right? Or the year before. They got released in 2020. So, again, you have now Triple H is bringing back all these other wrestlers. He brings back one of the guys that Punk mentions in this skit in 2011. He also brings back a guy, Johnny Gargano, right? They call him Mr. Johnny Wrestling. Fly, Johnny Fly, right? This is the really cool one. Who do we talk about in the last episode? We talked about the Brunson brothers, right? And I show you guys some clips of them on the Johnny Carson Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, right? Who does Triple H bring back around the same time? January, February 2023? he brings back a wrestler by the name of Bronson Reed, right? So you have Brunson brothers, Bronson Reed, right? So you have Bronson in WWE. Wow, what are the odds of that? And, you know, Johnny Carson has that famous line, too. He's like, oh, not even 4 trumpet players could do it, right? He goes, but I think those Brunson brothers, they'll be back, right? So who knows if they'll be back or not. You also have Triple H signed Logan Paul to a big contract, right? A full-time contract. He had made some appearances at this point, but now he signs them, right? And we have PBD, Patrick Bet David. I don't think we've talked about him yet. He's an interesting character. He is Iranian and Assyrian, I believe. So he's got that mix from the bloodline, if you talk about that. If we go back to the Jesus strand, it's kind of very similar mix there. He's a very big JFK fan. If you go to his banner, he has this big picture. It's a round table. He's sitting at one of it. And who do you have at this round table? Shah of Iran, we talked about that. Abe Lincoln is in there. JFK is in there. And there's some other guys too. I think Tupac is in there. But it's interesting, right? The people that he chose, that he looks up to, that he put in this round table picture in his banner. He's talking about Logan Paul. And he's saying Logan Paul at this time, he's all over the place. He needs to chill out, even with the wrestling. You know, take a break, Logan Paul, right? Well, Logan Paul was in the Royal Rumble that year. And he has this very big spot with a wrestler, Ricochet, who we'll talk about more in a couple episodes. And Ricochet and Logan Paul do this spot that went viral on X, where they both jump off the ropes and then collide with each other in the center of the ring, right? And they just fall down, right? Now, the interesting about Ricochet, he is like the spitting image. He looks just like Andrew Tate, right? He looks just like Andrew Tate. And who is Logan Paul beefing with on social media and through interviews and all this other stuff? It's Andrew Tate, right? So you have Logan Paul versus Andrew Tate in WWE, and we even have Elon comment on it and say this is probably the closest. You know, Elon says Logan Paul versus Andrew Tate in WWE. It's bound to happen or something like that, right? So Elon getting in on WWE, and what just happened with WWE and X and Elon, right? They just signed a new deal, WWE Speed. It's going to be an exclusive show only on X, right? So, DX, X, we love the X, we love the letter X, XRP, to the moon, let's get it, let's get it. So, you know, and again, this is all Triple H's doings, right? So, it's a new era, he's bringing back all these people. He did the same thing in 2011, he brought people back. He brought JR back, Jim Ross, he brought CM Punk back, you know, and what's he doing in real life in 2022? He's bringing people back, too. He's putting his own spin on it. So he brings another guy back, Karrion Kross, right? Who a lot of his detractors on the internet, they call him QAnon Kross, right? Because he's kind of like-minded to us, a lot of the people that watch 4VKM. And his wife, Scarlett, or girlfriend, I don't know what it is, but they're together, they've been together. She comes out to the ring with them, and they have the hourglass, right? And they always put the hourglass, and they flip it, and they say, tick-tock. Right, that's kind of their thing. She's worn TikTok makeup on her face, right? But she also does a lot of stuff with tarot cards, right? And they show one tarot card. He's feuding with Rey Mysterio at the time. And they pull out a tarot card. It's the Emperor card, right? And the Emperor card, if you look that up, that is actually a Trump card in tarot cards. So thought that was interesting. And as he's feuding with them that year, that January, we have the Royal Rumble coming up that month. And Rey Mysterio had won the Royal Rumble 17 years before this Royal Rumble. So it was the 17th anniversary of Rey Mysterio winning the Royal Rumble. And guess what? Rey Mysterio's number in that Royal Rumble? Number 17 that he came out at. Now, he didn't come out at number 17 because he was attacked backstage by his son, number 18, Dominic, right? So you have 17 followed by 18. You have Q and R. Kind of interesting, right? Father and son. Interesting, right? 17-year delta. Him winning the Royal Rumble. Comes out at number 17. I don't think it's planned. It's probably all just a coincidence, right? So, you know, the last one that I think is relevant that he brings back Bray Wyatt, right? Now, again, I think this was set in motion before Vince left, because if we look back at Bray Wyatt's promos where he leaves, he's basically laying everything out, how he's going to come back, right? So, we'll give Triple H the credit for it, but now we got Bray Wyatt back, as the White Rabbit, following the White Rabbit, right? And walking out with the lantern, with the Tiffany blue lighting behind him, right? And then they have those lanterns for sale online, 4 VKM lanterns, the Hyannis edition, right? Go get yours. So, next we're going to go on how Vince came back to WWE, right? Now, Ted Turner was his big adversary in the 90s, and Vince ends up winning, right? And Vince comes out and he cuts this promo on Monday Night Raw when he closes the deal to buy WCW from Ted Turner. And he says, you know, how do you beat a billionaire? He says, the only way that you can beat a billionaire is if you become one yourself. And that's why he took his company public in 1999. Now, what happened a couple years before this? Ted Turner did the merger with AOL Time Warner, right? So I'm showing you these clips of Ted Turner basically talking about his regrets, right? And how when he did that merger, he thought he was the one that was buying Time Warner, right? He had 10% of the stock. So he figured he had enough control where he'd still be in charge, right? Then the merger goes through. He gets diluted down to 3%. And then the executive team at Time Warner, AOL, they force Ted Turner out, and Ted Turner loses his company, right? So you got to figure Vince is watching this, right? Back, a couple years before he goes public. So Bischoff's telling the story on his podcast, 83 Weeks or Strictly Business, one of those. And he's just saying how Vince had to have been like so forward thinking the way that he set up the stock. And a phrase that he used, he goes, it's almost like he could see into the future. Geez, what have I been talking about in 38 episodes so far? It's almost like Vince can see into the future, right? He kind of puts everything that happens in the future in there. And it reminds me of the drop that says something along the lines of, Q, how do you know the future? Control, right? This is all controlled, in my opinion. Even what's going on now with Vince seems to me controlled. Because remember, he's in this trouble now with the lawsuit. They say he's human trafficking and all this other stuff. It came about because he stopped paying an NDA. Not TKO, like Vince Russo likes to say. Not Ari Emanuel didn't stop paying it. Vince McMahon stopped paying the NDA 7 months before the merger with UFC and creating TKO. So, again, Vince created this situation. It's like he's orchestrated the whole freaking thing. So, how does he set up the stocks when he takes the company public? I think he retained like 33% of the stock, right? But the stock had a special voting power, right? So he had a Class A stock that only McMahon family members could own, right? So him, Linda, Stephanie, Shane, they were the only ones and their heirs that were eligible for this stock. And what this stock did is it gave them like, I forget what it was, but like 8 times the voting power of a regular share. So he might have owned 33% of the company, but he had like 85% of the voting power, right? Even though it was a publicly traded company. So he's good. I mean, it's almost impossible to do a hostile takeover in that situation, right? And this ends up paying off all these years later when he was forced out, right? Because of the scandal that came out June 17th. And this is how he gets himself back in. So now the news starts picking it up. They're like, man, Vince McMahon, remember I put in the last episode, Vince McMahon in mid-December plotting his return back to WWE. And he does it. He basically writes a letter to the board of directors and he's like, hey, I know you guys have these media right deals coming up for Raw and SmackDown, but as the #1 shareholder, unless I'm involved in these talks, I won't approve anything. So he had him by the balls, right? Then he brings back 2 people puts them on the board of directors, 2 people that used to work for him in the past, right? So he stacks the board, he brings himself back onto the board, and votes himself chairman. They all, he has the votes now to put himself back in as chairman, and Vince McMahon is back as chairman. And he's basically saying he's back to take care of some big business and possibly sell the company, right? Sell the WWE. Now, what happens when the news happens this day? We have this this guy, JD from New York, who loses his mind, right? He's a big Vince hater, and he's losing his shit because he's seen the news come out. I didn't think this was possible. I didn't think this was possible. All of the wrestling media are big-time libs, all of them. And, that's why they have such slanted coverage, just like how the fake news is so slanted towards one party, with the exception of one network, but that's the uni party right there, Fox and the rest of them. They're all one big group, right? So it's the same thing in the wrestling media. That's why I'm here. I try to give some sort of balance here in some fair coverage for Vince. Just tell you the other side of the story on things, right? So Vince is back, right? So now the news hits. This is where it gets crazy. So the news hits. Vince McMahon is back, right? The stock explodes. How much does the stock explode? 17%. And they have to halt trading at 17% increase. So they literally, it hits 17%. They're like, all right, pull it. They pulled it off they took it off the stock market. So they stopped trading for the day when it hit 17%. They didn't stop it at 16%. They didn't stop it at 19%, 12%, 24%. They stopped it at 17%. So, again, just another coincidence, right? So, what else happens? Stephanie McMahon steps down. Remember, Stephanie McMahon stepped up when Vince was on her way out. Vince was on his way out. And it kept the McMahon, running things right there. So, Stephanie steps down. Now, I was curious. I'm like, and there's a scene that I show from probably 2003 where Vince gets rid of Stephanie, right? So, again, it happened in WWE storylines. It happened in real life years later. So, when did Vince come back? The first time he was taken out of WWE by Triple H in 2011. I guess that's the second time, if you count what happened in 99 and 2000, right? So Vince, I'll set the stage. Remember, Triple H came out, said, board of directors, we've lost faith, you're out, I'm in, right? Now Triple H is running WWE for a couple months, and the WWE wrestlers go on strike. And as a result of the strike, Vince McMahon comes back to kind of end the strike because the wrestlers are demanding Triple H be removed. So, Vince comes out, and what's the date? It's 10-10-11, right? We got our guy, VK. How many times have you seen VK say 10-10 wins, right? 10-10 wins. Well, Vince McMahon won on 10-10-11 because that's when he came back, storyline, to take control back of the company. But he didn't just take control back. He takes Triple H out. And you know who he puts in charge, storyline-wise? He puts in Big Johnny, John Laurinitis. And who's that? I mentioned him before. John Laurinitis is the co-defendant with Vince in this whole lawsuit that he's dealing with right now. So there you go. He's there, right? So Vince comes back on 10-10-11 in storyline, right, as chairman of the board, right, which is what he comes back as in WWE, same thing. And you have Jim Cornette. Jim Cornette's losing his mind, right, laughing his ass off. Now, Jim Cornette, not a Trump guy, hates Trump, right, but he has a respect for Vince. You can tell he has a respect for Vince. And, what's Cornette's famous line? He goes, Vince McMahon forced himself back into office on January 6th. He said he had to have stolen that idea from Trump, right? And it's just hilarious to me. Remember, the last episode, what was supposed to happen on January 6th? We thought Brunson brothers, Trump comes back in as a result of all that, because they had the hearing. If they acted on the case, and they could have popped Trump back in, right? That didn't happen. But you had his bestie, Vince McMahon, came back that same day instead. You know what's weird else about that day? 1/6/23, Linda McMahon's pack, America First pack, same day Vince McMahon comes back, they arrive on Truth Social. Go look that up. Go look up the A1 Policy Truth Social account. Look at the date it was created. January 6th, 2023, right? So it's almost like all working together, right? Don't forget, Linda tagged A1 Policy in her video, The Best Is Yet to Come. It was her pinned tweet for a long time, but it's now been replaced. And then the first reply to that, timestamp, 6/17. What was 6/17? The day Vince stepped down as CEO, right? And then she goes on Truth Social the day Vince comes back to WWE. So it's all wrestling, folks. It's all wrestling. So Vince comes back, and we go back to 2000 when Vince comes back, right? So Stephanie and Triple H, remember, they're running the show at this point. They're on the road to WrestleMania 2000. And Vince McMahon comes out the limo. And we're playing Back in Black, right? AC/DC, because AC/DC is Vince's favorite band in the whole world, right? So now you have Vince McMahon back. He's walking backstage. He's got Triple H approaches him backstage. He knocks him out, right? He punches Triple H out. I'm showing you the letters that he had sent to the board of directors, right? Triple H had actually voted not to have Vince come back, but he was outvoted, right? So, he takes him out. You have the same week Vince comes back. Who else comes back on X or Twitter, whatever it was called then? Our boy Vincent Kennedy, VK, right? So we have Vincent Kennedy McMahon back in WWE, and the same week, just a couple days later, we have Vincent Kennedy, Vincent Crip, 46, back on Twitter, right? Can't make this up. I mean, what a vibe that was, right? And what's VK posting? He's posting a bunch of gorillas randomly, right? No context, just videos of gorillas on TikTok. And what's the famous, position that Vince would sit at when he was running the shows? It's the gorilla position. And this clip where he returns and knocks out Triple H from 2000, you see the sign right there. Gorilla, with a picture of a gorilla right there. So I'm not saying VK had timed all that. I'm not saying VK is VKM, right? It's just, for me, from my perspective, watching it all, I'm like, wow, what are the odds of all this, right? So it's very, very, very fun. Very fun for me. As he's walking out to the ring, there's an R sign randomly, right? So Vince is walking out. This is 2000. He's back, right? And they show a guy with an R sign, right? So what are the odds of that, right? Super random. Probably was for Rock, but OCK didn't lift their ends of it, right? And JR is talking about how he's back with a purpose, right? He's back on a mission. He's walking like he's on a mission, right? And when Vince came back in 2023, he was on a mission. He was on a mission to sell the WWE. And he ends up doing it, and we talk about that in a future episode, right? But I list all the suitors here. And we're using those famous Vince McMahon GIFs where he has those reactions. He's got the girl dancing in front of him, and he's doing all the facial expressions, right? Remember, they started the rumor and said that the Saudis were going to buy the WWE, right? That was fake news. Not surprised, right? So I go through the suitors. Endeavor, number 1. Disney, Comcast, AEW, which they never had a chance, right? But they wanted to act like they could. And I show Vince laughing at that prospect, right? Fox, Netflix. Now Netflix ends up buying WWE Raw later down the line. More recently, now Raw is going to go to Netflix starting in 2025. Big $5 billion streaming deal. And ultimately, who ended up buying WWE or merging with the UFC? It was Endeavor. And Endeavor was the first company listed out of all these companies in the video. Go watch the video. I show Endeavor first, right? Were they the front runner? A couple people thought so, but a lot of people thought it would be NBC Universal. Some people thought Amazon. And of course, remember, you had all those idiots saying the Saudis were going to buy it too. Again, that was just fear porn. You know, and, oh, Vince is back. He's going to sell it to the evil Saudis, right? It's just shoveling shit on Vince McMahon all the time. I'm sick of it. Sick of it. So what's Vince do when he gets into the ring? He knocks out Shane McMahon. He, and Shane, remember what I told you, Shane gets taken out in 2022, before Vince leaves later that year, right? Shane McMahon leaves, and Vince says he'll never be back, right? Well, that doesn't happen. From there, I show you Howard Stern. He's an idiot, but, he's interviewing Stephanie McMahon in around 2003, I think, 2004 maybe. And they ask her, they go, hey, so you have a brother, right? And she goes, yeah. Actually, he says, you have two brothers, right? And she goes, one brother. And so he goes, so when Vince retires, is he going to leave it all to you? And she says very prophetically, she goes, hopefully, but, he might not. And they're like, oh, he might not. He doesn't have to if he doesn't want to, right? Well, kind of look what happened, right? There, he ended up selling it, right? So Stephanie was kind of right. Now, she still owns some stock there, but they don't own the whole thing like they used to, right? So, who else is back on Twitter? Trump gets reinstated back on Twitter. And I show you guys a fun little clip of him sitting on a park bench in front of a lake with Abraham Lincoln. And he's teaching Abraham Lincoln how to tweet. And he's like, let me show you this tweet. The Democrats will steal your money and they'll kill your baby, something like that, right? And he goes, boom, tweet. He goes, now you try. And Abe Lincoln goes, my fellow Americans. And then Trump says, nope, takes it from him. Let me show you how to do it, right? My fellow Americans, look to Twitter, drop 55. 55, there's that number again. And then what's Trump say after he sends the tweet? He goes, oh, look, Vince McMahon just retweeted it. Score. Remember, they follow each other. And they each followed 50-50, right? So 5-5. There's another 5-5 for you there. Don't forget, their brothers passed away 5 months, 5 days apart from each other. What are the odds of that? So it's nuts. And actually, dropped 55. I was right about that. So, how did Vince retire? When he retired in July, when he left completely, he retired via a tweet. And he said, it's time for me to retire. It's his second to last tweet, because now I think he's tweeted since he's been back one time about the merger. And Nick Khan, who got elevated as CEO, he goes on Bill Simmons' show, and he's like, if you thought Vince was retiring with a tweet, you don't know Vince, right? So Vince ended up coming back, right? Now he's gone again, but, it's just fascinating how this whole thing takes place. So Bischoff, again, they ask him, they go, Eric, what do you think about Stephanie stepping down now that Vince is back, right? And a lot of people point to this and say, oh, Stephanie, she knew better. That's why she had to step down and get out of there. She didn't want to be anywhere near Vince when the stuff broke out. And that could be true, right? You got to protect yourself at the end of the day. So does it do Stephanie any good to be close to that situation, especially in 2024 when all the new stuff's coming out about Vince? No, probably not, right? Does it make sense for Triple H and Stephanie to vote against Vince coming back when they did? Yeah, it does, because that protects them as well, right? So, again, like I've been saying, it's all wrestling. And Bischoff kind of agrees, and he says, this is all Shakespeare. He's like, I don't think much into the Stephanie thing because it seems like it's all Shakespeare to me. And what ends up happening in storyline, remember when Vince came back, he knocks out Triple H, he knocks out Shane, right? He feuds with Linda at WrestleMania 17, which I forgot to mention. When he bought WCW, he actually, from Ted Turner, one of the things he said was, I want Ted Turner to walk down that aisle at WrestleMania 17 and sign the contract there. So one of the biggest moments in Vince McMahon's career happened the week of WrestleMania 17, which still blows my mind. But anyway, Vince makes up with all these people. And you even see at WrestleMania in 2023, Shane McMahon comes back after Vince said he'd never be back, right? Well, he comes back. And you see me with my 4VKM sign marking out like crazy, right? So it's all Shakespeare at the end of the day. It's, again, how do you predict the future? Control. You control all the events that lead up to it, right? And that controls the outcome at the end of the day. Now, who does he come back against? Or, who does he help when he comes back? He helps The Rock. And he helps The Rock win his match on that Monday Night Raw where he came back, he knocked out Triple H, he knocked out Shane, right? He helps The Rock win. And The Rock ends up going to WrestleMania as a result of that, into the main event, right? And what are we talking about today? First of all, a couple days before the whole Vince scandal came out, what do? He puts The Rock. The Rock joins the board of TKO. And that's Vince's last appearance. Last time we see Vince is at the New York Stock Exchange with The Rock ringing the bell right next to The Rock, right? So what have I always been saying? Vince and The Rock, they go way back. There's loyalty there. There's a lot of people that like to spit it and say, The Rock screwed Vince, forced him out of the company, all this other stuff. I see it differently. I see it as The Rock is a placeholder for Vince right now. Will Vince come back to WWE? It looks highly unlikely, but who knows, right? At the end of the day. And the last thing we tease in this video, this was beginning of 2023, we tease The Rock versus Roman Reigns at WrestleMania because you have Jimmy Fallon asking Roman Reigns about it on his show. And what are we getting this year? Well, we thought we were going to get WrestleMania, The Rock versus Roman Reigns in the main event. The Rock's back now on television, but it looks like they're teaming up together now instead. So, and we'll get that match eventually in the future. But again, Rock versus Roman. We talked about it then. A lot of people were talking about it then, but now it's happening now. And it's happening in the backdrop of all this Vince stuff. People say this is a deflection, this is a distraction to get away from the Vince stuff. Maybe it is, right? But maybe this thing has all been planned out perfectly. And speaking of planned out perfectly, shout out again to the MVP of 4VKM, B Skulls. Give him a follow, the B Skulls on X. He goes to another show, and he has a fat head, 4VKM hat, fat head with a white hat that says 4VKM on it. And he's like in one of the first couple rows back, and the bloodline's in the ring, and they're doing the put your ones up, right? The QAnon symbol, I like to call it. And right as the camera's on them doing that, boom, we get the big 4VKM fathead in the shot on WWE once again. So, B Skulls, he's the man. So, keep going, B Skulls. Sign guy, 4VKM sign guy, we call him. All right, so we got a couple episodes left, but check this one out. 11/11, The Boss is back. Link is in the description. Don't forget, we have the 4VKM podcast coming up, 2/21/2024, and 4VKM.com, so you can watch all the episodes in order. So, until next time, and as always, enjoy the show.